evening, all. Well, this is one very happy Englishman, I can tell you, because England have won the Cricket World Cup final. And after many years, I mean, how long I've been watching cricket since the early 1980s. This is the third one-day final I've watched where England's been in the final, and this is the first time we've won it. And in true English sporting fashion, it wasn't done easily. We didn't absolutely dominate the match like English football in 1966 and English rugby in 2003. It went to extra time. Things that had hitherto never been a feature in the sport, they had to call upon it. I mean, this thing, in cricket, was the super over to decide the match. That's never been used before in a one-day international final. And like the 2003 Rugby World Cup, it went to extra time. That had never been done before. And when England win a World Cup in any sport, something extraordinary happens. It pivots on a kind of 1 in a million chance of something happening. 1966, there was that the call of the Russian linesman. Did the Jeff Hurst's second goal cross the line and a goal, or as a lot of Germans think, it only crossed halfway across the line and then would have been disallowed as a goal? But it hinged on that moment. And 2003 Rugby World Cup, it hinged on winning a drop goal right in front of the Austrian goalpost in the last 10 to 20 seconds of the game. And this time round in the Cricket World Cup, it was Ben Stokes coming back for a second run, diving for the crease to remain in, and New Zealand ended up overthrowing the ball and it going to the boundary. And a 2 was converted into a 6. Again, Stokes hit the ball, and it was going to get caught by a New Zealand fielder, but the New Zealand fielder put 1 foot behind him, touched the boundary rope. Again, a 2, or most likely Stokes being out, was converted into 6 runs for Stokes, and he remained in. And the match changed, and then it got to the super over. These are extraordinary things, and coming off the back of a few extraordinary tennis matches at Wimbledon. Federer Djokovic was very intense, and that went into extra time on that. But that, even though that was exciting and interesting enough, and the quality of the tennis was high, nothing compared to the men's semi-final between Federer and Nadal. There's something magical that happens when those two are on the court. I remember the last time Federer and Nadal were at a Wimbledon final, men's final. It was the longest tennis match in history, I think. It might still be. And it was also the greatest tennis match I've ever seen. I'm old enough to remember Borg and McEnroe in 1981. It was extraordinary. The quality of the tennis, two contrasting styles of player. Federer, the graceful, stylish right-hander. Nadal, the jumping jackrabbit improviser, who's left-handed. It was superb to watch. And I got to think, because a couple of weeks ago, all the talk was about the women's sport. We were given the football World Cup for women. And women's cricket has been, the mainstream media have been talking about the women's Ashes that are happening right now. And I didn't wade in on this debate. Other people were making the debate, and I really didn't feel like it was a debate I wanted to get into. But now I've seen a number of sporting events in the last few days, and it's put things into perspective. And I would say that this Cricket World Cup final that we've just witnessed earlier on today absolutely beats the women's football World Cup final, because the twists and turns of the match, the intensity that it was played, the fact that it pivoted on these marginal decisions, chances taken, and the kind of skill and the intensity. Even though I will give kudos, the women's World Cup football was good in its context. But one thing I noticed, and this carries over into the Wimbledon matches that I saw, particularly the semi-finals and the final, is that it comes back to the way the male brain is versus the female brain, and that is that men are more willing to take risks and to take chances than women. And I see this played out. You know, that people saying there was some good quality women's football. I can think of muffed chances, and people saying, in particularly in the final between the USA and England, that in the men's game they would not the players would not have missed the chances that the England women's team would have had. I'm not sure about that because I don't have the technical information required to make such a judgment call. But when I look at this Cricket World Cup final, the amount of willingness to take risks, particularly when it got to the last few overs, where New Zealand and England were really going for it and trying things. The super over itself was extraordinary because in the super over, you pick two batsmen to bat to get as many runs as possible in 1 over 6 balls, and the fielding team can only pick one bowler. And who are you going to pick? And it was interesting because England chose as their batsmen the informed guys, the guys who had taken England to the threshold of winning the World Cup, and thought, no, we're going to back those two. Those two are informed that when the chips were down earlier on in the match, those two guys got England into a potential winning position. So England chose those two. It's a kind of fairly safe bet. I think most cricket fans would have chosen those two. But the bowler that they chose, they could go for the tried and tested Mr. Experience Chris Wokes. They went for the young guy, the youngest guy, the newest guy, I should say, in the team, Jofra Archer, because I thought he had a little bit of zip, a bit of pace, a bit of a surprise factor to him. So that's a risk, giving it to the least experienced member of the team to bowl over. But then the New Zealanders did something risky. They could have gone for their two best recognised batsmen, the two guys who are considered world-class batsmen in that New Zealand team, which were Kane Williamson and Ross Taylor. They didn't go for those. They went for Needham and Martin Guptill. Because they were seen, Needham was seen as a cool character under pressure who could belt the ball a bit. Guptill was seen as a kind of tricksy player, and it was interesting. But they did go for their tried and tested, safe bowling option, Trent Boult. It's interesting to see how that risk-taking side of the male brain comes through in sport, and I think this is where the criticism of women's sport comes into it. Is that what you get at the men's game? They say, "Oh yeah, but you don't get the diving and the rolling and the oh referee, I heard," in the women's game. But do you get that risk taking? Do you get that something, that bolt out of the blue that makes world champions? The thing that nobody quite counted on, that one or two players step their game up into something transcendental. That's what we got today in the Cricket World Cup final. That's what we got in the men's Wimbledon semi-final, and a little bit of that as well in the men's final. So yes, well done England, and in extraordinary manner. This is what sport is all about, and we'll be talking about this Cricket World Cup final for decades. It was that exciting. So what's been catching my attention this week, other than the major sporting events? Well, not that much, because I've been very busy with real life stuff. So I haven't kept that closer eye on the news. But if you want more in-depth coverage, go and see my good buddy, the Britisher, or Dave Cullen. He's usually worth a watch. For me, however, only a few things stood out this week. One of them being Facebook's weird new online hate policy that they had. So at the start of the week, I saw Paul Joseph Watson having a meltdown on Twitter. What was going on, I wondered. And he said that Facebook, even though they say they're against and will take stern action against hate and threats of violence and death threats on their platform, However, they said that it was the exception they gave was people that they considered dangerous individuals. Well, who's a dangerous individual? Well, people who have been accused of things and been highlighted in the media as being hate speech merchants, or peddling hate, or peddling hateful ideologies, or dangerous ideologies. Now, what was standout is that you didn't have to be convicted of a crime to get on the dangerous persons list. The media basically said who was and who isn't dangerous, and then Facebook would take action against that. And when the media says such and such is dangerous, who do they mean? Well, welcome back, our old friend, the Alternative Influence Network report from the Data and Society organization. Basically, that weird web chart where everybody who has even acknowledged somebody else's existence, be it on the center or the right or the extreme right, is part of this scary alternative influence network. So essentially, who did the New York Times splash on their front cover saying that they were dangerous YouTubers? It was all people on the Alternative Influence Network report. And who are dangerous this time round? People on the Alternative Influence Network report. I called it at the time. I said this will be used as a prescription list, a handy cut out and keep guide for who should be banned or deleted off social media, and thus it has come to pass. Now, fortunately, after the furore, and in conjunction with Donald Trump's symposium on web censorship that was happened also this week, Facebook just quietly dropped it. Saying it's okay to send threats of violence or death threats against people you deem to be dangerous. It's illegal. It certainly is in the United Kingdom and in the United States. No wonder Facebook, probably the legal team said, guys, you have really got to get rid of that clause. But yeah, then that brought us onto the Donald Trump web censorship symposium. So a little bit earlier on today, I was sent something on Twitter. It was a link to a tweet where Ben Shapiro said that he was criticizing this conference, this meeting at the White House on censorship, particularly of online right-leaning bloggers and YouTubers. And it was just a kind of one line from Shapiro, and it was sort of retweeted at me. Well, what do you think, Rhubba? Because there are some people who have three misconceptions about me, and that is, one is that I'm pro-war, two, that I am unashamedly a total Ben Shapiro fanboy, and three, that I'm a Michael Gove fanboy. And all three of those things are untrue. I'm not going to comment on my position on the use of military force or my comments on Michael Gove. But on the Shapiro side of it, I don't buy into that Shapiro's a negative to the right and to the culture war. I think that's far too reductionist, far too simplistic term, and it just smacks of kind of ideological purity on the part of some, particularly at the more libertarian end. But I will say this about Shapiro, is that why do I watch him? Why do I follow what he says? Because I think he's got a good take on American politics in general. He's very good at explaining how the US government and the Constitution works on a lot of issues, particularly things about family and about morality and ethics. I agree with quite a lot of what he says. Do I agree with absolutely everything he says? No. Do I follow his line? No. But I think he has a role to play in the culture wars, and he has a role to play on the right and as part of the anti-left. I don't think every take he does is correct, and in this matter, as with the meeting at the White House, I've been sent one quote. I've got to go away and look at what he says in totality. I mean, here's the thing. We're always saying, oh, the left take things out of context. They take a snippet here, a snippet there, put it out of context and try and smear people. And then I look at the libertarian right and I think, you guys do the same thing sometimes. You know, let's see the whole piece. And let's look at it and see where he's right. If he's right, let's see where he's wrong. If he's wrong, come on, let's look at this. And from what I can gather, and I've got to go away and look at it, and it's not going to be a kind of quick reaction. I've got to look at it from the. Do I agree with him that Trump shouldn't have had this conference? No, I don't. I mean, if that's what Shapiro is actually saying, I think this conference needs to happen because I think it sends a clear message to the big tech companies, to the left-leaning media. No, you just can't censor people and run people out of town based on their because they're putting an alternative political opinion, and you can't go around smearing people as alt-right, right-wing, hard-right, fascists, white supremacy. You cannot keep going around doing that, smearing people in this way and using that as a justification to get rid of your rivals. And big media shouldn't be using this as a way of firming up their failing industries by trying to wipe out the competition. Now, from what I can gather of the people who are attending, I don't think it's as. I think where Shapiro might have ground is that he complains that there are too many conspiracy theorists present. He lumps Paul Joseph Watson in that category because I think he sees Watson as part of Alex Jones's crowd, and Shapiro doesn't have much time for that. I think he's being disingenuous to Paul Joseph Watson. But then again, I think Paul Joseph Watson, full bile and rhetoric against Ben Shapiro, I think is over the top as well. I see both of them having a role to play in the culture wars, but they do it in very different ways. And you're going to get that. You're not going to get everybody kind of doing everything the same way. This is why I don't like this kind of ideological purity test that seems to be creeping in on the right, because if anything, the right should be against that kind of thing. We should be against ideological purity because unlike the Marxists and the socialists and the communists, we don't have a playbook to work off. Okay, they have Das Kapital, they have the Little Red Book. You know, they have their philosophers and their chosen writers, and they're all expected to fall in. I mean, I've witnessed socialist groups in operation, and they're always demanding, not asking, demanding a level of ideological conformity. And we have different ones. You know, we have the competing in economics, certainly. We have competing viewpoints. We have the Chicago school, the Austrian school. We don't have a book, a single philosopher that we go to, and we're not expected. You know, I've been to many meetings of conservative groups, of right-leaning groups, even centrist groups, and it's more discussion and it's more toing and froing, and there's less demand for a kind of ideological conformity. We kind of work things out through dialogue, through exchanging ideas, and sometimes, you know, we get a theory and we listen to that, but we're not beholden to it in the way that the left are. And I think if we start getting into that area where we say, are you Chicago or are you Austrian? And if you make a judgment call based on that, and if you're not on the Austrians, you're out of the club. Okay, if you're not backing this guy, if you're not against that guy, you're out of the club. And it looks like, you know, the tendency to punch right. And I just think with this, I'll put this back to people who are completely anti-Shapiro. No, look, we can all criticize Shapiro over things, but the people who are dead against, want him chucked out of our little merry band, okay? Shapiro, right? If you remember the invasion of Iraq, there were the deck of cards. Saddam Hussein was kind of like the king or the ace or whatever. You know, imagine the left have got that deck of cards, right? And they've labelled everybody. And now the top guy, I don't know, the ace of hearts, or the king of hearts is Donald Trump. He's the number one guy they want to get. Okay, Shapiro's up there. He's the jack. He's a jack of diamonds, let's say. Okay, he's up there. He's one of the ones that they want to get. Okay, Paul Joseph Watson. Okay, 10 of spades. Okay, that's probably where he sits in the deck. But Shapiro's the, you see lefties, real rampant lefties, wanting to take down Shapiro in the Daily One, wanting to get rid of it somehow. You remember that discussion Susan Wojcicki had with what's her name at that Women in Tech conference? Why can't you ban Ben Shapiro? My teenage son is following him. There you go. There you go. That's Ben Shapiro's usefulness. He is getting into the heads of the teenage children of rabid lefties, and they want him banned. All I'll say, he's doing something right. May not be ideologically true, may be wrong on a lot of things. He's doing something right. Just leave him be. Okay? But I don't think he's immune to criticism. I think, as I said on this issue, from the surface details, I think he's got some things wrong. But he may have a couple of valid points in there as well. I've got to go and look at it. But I just think chuck him out of the group, net negative, still not buying it. Yeah, another thing I noticed was about Boris Johnson. Now, I think we're going to get the British version, full-on Boris derangement syndrome. He was accused this week of throwing the outgoing British ambassador to the United States under a bus. This man has tendered his resignation. Boris is quite, how did he throw him under a bus? Well, he didn't say much. Jeremy Hunt came to this man's defence vehemently. Jeremy Hunt nailed his colours to the mast. Boris was a little bit more ambivalent, and ambivalence is interpreted as throwing somebody under a bus. Objectively speaking, I couldn't see anything that wrong in Boris Johnson's position that he took this week, if he indeed even took a position on it. He's if he becomes Prime Minister, he's going to have to deal with Donald Trump in the United States. And it's best to keep some of your powder dry for that one. So that was a weird thing to accuse. But I would imagine the Boris haters will go into overdrive. They'll pick on anything and everything to do with him. The other thing was that people were tweeting about the interview he did with Andrew Neil recently, where Boris didn't have answers to Neil's questions. I think people who've watched this channel before know my position on Neil. I just think sometimes Neil goes into a kind of attack dog mode. He's not really there to get the truth. He's there to put people on the spot. He's brilliant when he goes after people we don't like. But at the same time, I'm not asking for a slick, smooth operator from Boris Johnson as Prime Minister or leader of the Conservative Party. And I don't think most of the country care about this interview. I think the chattering classes cared about that interview, saying, look at Boris, he doesn't know the answers to this, and he looked dishevelled, disorganised, in the face of the rabid attack dog, Andrew Neil. Well, look at the career trajectories of the two men. One could end up being Prime Minister. One, in a few weeks' time, is going to be kind of losing his show on the BBC. He's just not going to do those kind of interviews anymore. So, I don't care about that interview. And finally this week, the bizarrest confrontation between two types of people I've seen in a long time. On the one hand, you have the socialist folk pop singer Billy Bragg, a man whose best known hit, New England, was famously covered a lot better by Kirsty MacColl. But let's see what the kind of John Cassavetes lookalike and Arch Mona had to say this week, because he emerged out of obscurity to take on political YouTubers. One of them not even one of the major players on political and cultural YouTube. But first of all, he wanted to address his comments about Chris Williamson and anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. And he did this in an epic 14-part tweet on Twitter, where he started saying, well, let me clarify why I said what I did about Chris Williamson. And then he's proceeded to, for the next 11 tweets in that thread, talking not about Chris Williamson, but about Sargon of Akkad. And just going on about Sargon and how it was terrible and how he maligned and threatened and abused Jess Phillips and yada yada yada. It was like, hello, has your account been hacked by Victoria Derbyshire by any chance, Billy? And so he just veered off talking. Let me explain about Chris Williamson, what he did wrong, okay, by mentioning Sargon of Akkad almost exclusively, and then not going back to talking about Chris Williamson. But that's not all. I mean, okay, granted, Sargon, bit of a big name in political YouTubing. But then he went after Morgoth's review. Now, I think I came across Morgoth for the first time last year. He did some very good film reviews, and one of them, which impressed me, was his review of a film called Downsizing. It's a film I can't stand. It's an appalling film, don't watch it. But he did a very good review about what the problems with Downsizing was. And I watched a couple of other things. And for Billy Bragg, just what this Morgoth review was about Stormzy's appearance at Glastonbury versus Morrissey's recent comments, political comments, and how Stormzy is really much a very Morgoth's proposal was that Stormzy is very much an establishment figure now. He's he's not edgy at all. His politics are as to be expected, within the kind of left-leaning media elite bubble. Everything about his Glastonbury act was very manufactured, pandering to the predominantly white, young, affluent middle-class audience. Whereas Morrissey represents a kind of more visceral, working-class outpouring. Now, what do I think of all this? I've never been a fan of Morrissey. Life isn't fair, shoes cost so much these days. Never got into his whining and his kind of I can't be within 10 feet of somebody's eaten meat in the last 5 days. But I certainly don't agree with the way he's being pilloried, and they're trying to erase his existence. And I think Morgoth was right to make a video. I think there's some very interesting talking points in that video. And yeah, Billy Bragg, it was just cringeworthy virtue signaling that there was no original ideas in anything that Billy Bragg said. It was just mouthing the kind of twittering class mantras that we've heard over and over and over again. And frankly, Bragg himself, is he punching down? He's only punching down in terms of the audience he's going after. He's going after people with just a few thousand subscribers as opposed to big hitters. But maybe that's where his career is at the moment. He's not headlining major gigs or festivals. He's certainly not got the centre stage at Glastonbury. So it seems weird that he seems to be like riling a goldfish bowl, saying, yeah, look at you, you're just goldfish, not realising he's in the bowl as well with everybody else. And finally, I'm going to put a link in the description below to what I thought was the best video I've seen this week. And that is Academic Agents, piece on does David Lammy fake his own hate mail. It's a fascinating video where David Lammy on social media has been saying, look, I've been sent this hate mail. Isn't it terrible? Terrible white supremacist. And people know, hang on, the handwriting in that hate mail looks remarkably like the handwriting in a hate letter you were sent last year. And it looks remarkably like your own handwriting that we see in a video where he's writing on a whiteboard. And a lot of the letters have definite similarities. The handwriting all looks the same. So You know, this is one of those stories that I hope will build. I hope this story has some legs to it. And so I'm going to put a link in the description. If you haven't seen the story, please do check it out. And if you want to share it across social media, I won't stop you. And the idea that David Lammy fakes his own hate mail, sort of fakes his own outrage, that really does. Take the biscuit. Come on, England. The Ashes next.